Hello, everyone, and most welcome to 1861 of the H series. We will today continue with Francis Y. Lynn's The Grammatical Nature of Wittgenstein's Private Language Investigation. Last time we went into a rather tough bit. It is the cheese paragraph of Wittgenstein. It is renowned to be hard to understand. 142. And I think most interpreters of Wittgenstein avoids this article for good reasons as well. It is very hard to get. It's easy language. There's no complexion in the language at all. But to get it, it's more than tough. While measuring or weighing the cheese, you can stop there. It is connected to seeing, experiencing. It is deeply connected to the sense of words, if you like. So the weighing of the cheese, the measuring problem goes into language itself. There is a good one. Pain. In the case of private language, there is no criterion of correctness for determining whether a person has pain. The criterion needs to be there in language. The criterion, so to speak, or the criterions in the weighing of the cheese, the scale, the consistency of the cheese, that it doesn't change weight, grow, or something like that. And the person doing the measuring, and also the before history, what has taken place before, the historical setting, so to speak. In the case of the private language, we have no criterion. So you can see here now from both perspectives, it is pointing to the same thing. From the way of there is no criterion, and from the way of weighing, measuring. They sort of point to the same thing from two different aspects. We need the pointing, we need the pain, we need the expression of the pain, and so on and so on. If he says that he cannot be sure which objects are red and which are not red, then his word red is senseless. It is an absolute need that it is connected to doings. It's not hanging freely in the air. It has a certain connectedness, well, not only a certain, quite a lot of connectedness. It's not too bad to mention this. It's not hanging in the air. It is founded. And the foundation is not in an a priori rule or a transcendental classical physical law. It is the actual doings that are the criterions, because there are many of them. There is a pointing, there is something ostensive when it comes to red. There is something of engagement when it comes to measuring. So we are interwoven with the things we do and preemptively, a priori, discern which is which. A bit like asking the question, what came first, is senseless in this case. And asking the question will lead to strife, problems. There is no happy ending to that question, so to speak. Do avoid it. We'll continue directly, I think, here where we stopped, and I see my colleague has already put me in the right spot. Giving n and the no criterion of correctness thesis. It is then easy to see that private words are senseless. The private speaker thinks that his words refer to sensations, but that is an illusion. He is merely going through the motion of naming sensations using nouns. Wittgenstein characterizes this kind of behavior vividly as you think that after all you must be weaving a piece of cloth because you are sitting at a loom, even if it is empty, and going through the motions of weaving. So private names are senseless. What about private language? As private language is made up by private words, private language is senseless too. What the private speaker is doing is merely going through the motion of speaking a language. He is not really speaking a language with sense. Wittgenstein expresses this point as and here we are on the brink of a discussion about the language in which someone speaks about his experiences, and which is intelligible only to himself. In this place, I shall not enter into this discussion, which belongs to the problems of idealism and solipsism. I wish to say only this much, that here no language is being described at all, even though it appears to be. Let us look back at the discussions made in this section and the preceding two sections. Section 3 shows that the definition of private language implies that the speaker has no natural expressions for his alleged sensations. Section 4 reveals that from this it follows that the private speaker has no criterion of correctness for using his private words. This is the no criterion of correctness thesis, and it is a grammatical statement. The present section presents another grammatical statement, N, which is that a name without a criterion of correctness for its use is senseless. from the no criterion of correctness thesis and N, it follows that private language is senseless. I think this is Wittgenstein's PLA. According to my interpretation, the PLA is indeed a grammatical investigation, which is based on two grammatical statements. The no criterion of correctness thesis and N. No hypothetical, disputable propositions are involved in the PLA. The conclusion is that private language is senseless. This is a thesis in the sense of PI 128, meaning that the thesis can be admitted by everyone who follows the reasoning carefully. A question can arise at this juncture. If the PLA can be admitted by everyone, then it means that everyone can see that private language is senseless. Then why does the philosopher, such as Russell, think that private language is a possibility? Why do they fail to see that private language is an illusion? Wittgenstein does try to diagnose the errors made. Wittgenstein does try to diagnose the errors made the philosopher, as I will explain in the next section. Wittgenstein's diagnosis. Wittgenstein's diagnosis of the philosopher's disease in the case of private language is this. The philosopher has failed to notice two distinctions. Which I will call respectively the normal-abnormal distinction and the sum-all distinction. The normal-abnormal distinction is expressed in PI 142. In normal cases, we talk of sensations using words such as red and pain without any problems. This is because normally we have natural primitive expressions or reactions for sensations. However, the case of private language is rather abnormal. The private speaker does not have any such expressions or reactions for sensations. Consequently, the words spoken by him, such as red, pain, or simply s, lose meaning. But the philosopher fails to notice the change of the circumstances. And he takes for granted that the words can still have meaning in the abnormal, private situation, and that private language is possible. The sum-all distinction is expressed in the following passage. What sometimes happens might always happen. What kind of proposition is that? It is like the following. If F parenthesis A makes sense, X Fx makes sense. If it is possible for someone to make a false move in some game, then it might be possible for everybody to make nothing but false moves in every game. Thus we are sorry. Thus we are under a temptation to misunderstand the logic of our expressions here, to give an incorrect account of the use of our words. Orders are sometimes not obeyed. But what would it be like if no orders were ever obeyed? The concept order would have lost its purpose. We can talk sensibly of a false move in a game. But such talk would be senseless if everybody made only false moves in every game. Similarly, some orders are indeed disobeyed. But if no order were ever obeyed, then the word order would be meaningless. In LPP 51, (177) and 292, Wittgenstein calls these conditions under which sentences make sense. I will call them conditions of sense. They are conditions that must be met in order for certain sentences to make sense. Sensation words must meet some conditions of sense too. A point to which I now turn in LPE, Wittgenstein writes the following remarks. Certain behavior under certain circumstances we call showing our toothache. Other behavior hiding our toothache. We can go up a bit. The game which we play with the word toothache entirely depends upon there being a behavior which we call the expression of toothache.
I.
Here, Wittgenstein says that sometimes one does hide his pain, but raises the question whether one can have pain without ever showing it. His last remark indicates that the answer is no. Wittgenstein also talks about the sum-all contrast in the case of color words. It is clear that we in our language use the words seeing red in such a way that we can say he, A, sees red but does not show it. On the other hand, it is easy to see that we would have no use for these words, that is, seeing red, if their application was severed from the criteria of behavior. Here Wittgenstein is more explicit, stating that seeing red would be of no use if we applied it to a person who has no outward seeing red behavior. And when a word or a sentence is useless, it is senseless.
Senseless.
The normal distinction and some all distinction are closely related. In ordinary everyday life, we do sometimes hide a sensation. For example, pain. And this is a normal situation. But if we never had any natural primitive expressions of sensation, then this would be a an abnormal situation. And listen now, oh, this is so good. The philosopher fails to see that when a situation gets more and more abnormal, the meaning of our words will become more uncertain. And will be totally lost in some specific circumstances. For instance, in the cheese example and the private diary example. As Wittgenstein reminds us of, the concept of pain is simply embedded in our life in a certain way. It is characterized by very definite connections.
Connections.
only surrounded by certain normal manifestations of life is there such a thing as an expression of pain.
Hey.
The origin and the primitive form of language is a reaction. Only from this can the more complicated forms grow. Language, I want to say, is a refinement. In the beginning was a deed, or was the deed. An inner process stands in need of outward criteria.
Outward. Oh. What?
The inner is tied up with the outer, not only empirically, but also logically. We can distinguish different sensations such as pain and itch
Ay. Ay. Ay.
because we have natural primitive expressions or reactions for sensations. If we had not talking about different sensations, would lose the point, and words such as pain, itch, S and T would be meaningless because there would be no criterion for correctness. That a person must have natural expressions for a sensation S is a condition of sense. To highlight this condition, I will call it S sense. S sense for the sentence A person has a sensation S. To make sense, the person must have natural expressions for S.
S.
Let us examine the nature of S sense. When we first encounter it, we might not agree to it. But if we think about the question, what would happen if the person had no natural expressions for S? We will see that the person would logically be unable to distinguish S from other sensations. That is, that he would have no criterion of correctness. And if we agree to N, then we will see that S would be senseless in this extreme case, and will agree to S sense is also a grammatical remark, or more precisely, a grammatical thesis. And I will stop with the word thesis. If you wonder why I stopped just before the next chapter, I want to retake what we've done today in a certain manner. So I leave that last paragraph when we go into the next chapter. So thesis will be the last one. Grammatical thesis even. So let me see if I can break this down here. Let me give it first try. This is going to be 2 tries on the same text. It is mighty difficult, and Hacker and Anscombe has not managed. So if you don't understand, you are in good company. Could we please, Kalle, go to page 12? And we go down to Wittgenstein's diagnosis, the subchapter 6. And there are 2 interesting distinctions here, and I'll repeat them and I'll ask you to remember them forever. And after the colon, the philosopher has failed to notice 2 distinctions, which I will call respectively the normal abnormal distinction and the sum all distinction. These things are pretty unique to Wittgenstein. Nothing similar is to be found with any thinker whatsoever. And especially the sum all distinction here. Let me put a word into your thinking. Sloppy slope. How things slowly go into the wrong end. Losing the meanings of words, it's not an instantaneous process. Never. Not making sense, with a few exceptions, happens over years, decades. I would put also in parenthesis there could be an almost institutionalized misuse of language, but that's my parenthesis and end of that here. And he is directing himself to the philosopher here, the interlocutor, if you like, and the last sentence of that paragraph. But the philosopher fails to notice the change of circumstances, and he takes it for granted that words can still have the meaning in the abnormal private situation, and that private language is possible. This is exactly like going to a foreign country. Maybe you are Livingstone and you go to the Congo and you bring back an animal of sorts, silk monkey. You bring back a silk monkey to England. That silk monkey he saw in the Congo being well, he had them with him in the Congo for weeks, and it was still well on the trip back to England. But in England, the monkey got sick and died. This cannot be known by Livingstone. He assumed that the monkey living in Africa in the heat with special fruits, with a special environment, would be healthy even in England. So there are just and good reasons for expecting the monkey to live. It's almost like a factor X is unknown to Livingstone. This is the same here. In the private language argument, the private language admirer or supporter is doing an illicit move. He can only become aware of that illicit move more or less by reading this, as you just read here. He cannot ever come to discover, because it is not that clear as a monkey just goes and die. Poor monkey. It is a slower process. It takes years for the monkey to die here. It takes decades. So you will not notice the disease going on. There's a nice connection here to Wittgenstein and his terminology. He says diagnosis, the philosophical disease, and so on. But see it as a slow progressing disease. And at no instance really, this is my take, does the philosopher do something irrational. It is more the conglomeration of perpetual wrongdoings, or to some extent wrongdoings. You get an example here on next page. Second cite there or paragraph. Orders are sometimes not obeyed. But what would it be like if no orders were ever obeyed? The concept order would have lost its purpose. So what will happen, I'm going to paint a picture here. In ordinary language, you will notice, like the monkey, some words sometimes do not really have a proper effect directly. They are hanging about. And that is absolutely normal. But what you could do is to take that not so common, I wouldn't say it's normal, it's a bit more abnormal, but it happens. It is within the normality of the word order. But then you lift it, you say, oh, it could be that orders are not obeyed. Then I lift that out of its context and I start using it with there is never anybody obeying the orders. This is the sense that he is trying to convey here. Most words in the language game sometimes act in an abnormal way or not 100% normal. We lift them out like the monkey, bring them into maybe academia, and say that we're going to use truth by itself. Sometimes in normal language, you can almost use truth that way. It's not the most common way, but we use it that way. Then we lift the word truth and it becomes this weird truth, which has no access to reality. In the beginning, it still works. Somehow, the monkey survived the trip to England. But slowly it's getting sicker and sicker, and one day it doesn't have any meaning anymore. It's very close to exercise. If you stop exercising, you will not lose your good health over a day. You will lose it eventually. If we go to, oh, it's very hard to tell where this is. If you go down just a little bit more, or go up, yeah, a little bit more, just a few lines. There. And in that line here, Wittgenstein says that sometimes one does hide his pain. So this does happen. That's not the normal case, but it does happen. But he raises the question whether one can have pain without ever showing it. His last remark indicates that the answer is no, very no. Wittgenstein also talks about the sum all contrasts in the case of color words. So if we never point out color words, they will lose their meaning. Sometime we must have felt pain, and then we became so good at hiding it so no one can see it. But at some instance, when you were young, you had to show it for that to be a recognition. And we know this to be true with children. Children who are born without pain sensation do not show pain expression, and although they get pretty good at imitating pain, they will make weird mistakes. There is an episode on in the TV series Doctor House, played by Hugh Laurie, when he, without really examining a patient, by interviewing her, discovers that she doesn't feel any pain and she became used at hiding it. But it's most possibly not 100%. If we go down further on that page, if you may, Kalle. And a bit more, almost to the end. I think it's like 7 lines from the end. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. I will start reading from the philosopher to the left, to the right. The philosopher fails to see that when a situation, and listen now, gets more and more abnormal, it's not black and white, it's a progressive. It doesn't happen overnight. The meaning of our words will become more, and I would add more and more uncertain, and will be lost, totally lost in some specific circumstances, like the cheese example and the private diary example. And listen to the quote here. I think that will be helpful. The concept of pain is simply embedded in our life in a certain way. It is characterized by very definite connections. It might be, dear listeners, we've forgotten. I think that's even likely to say that. We have no recollection of those things anymore. We forgot how we learn it. And we never made any memory of the learning process. Why would we? So the forgetfulness is not that we once noticed how we learn pain or the term table, to bring in an Augustinian example. No, we never paid any note to it. And I don't think that we could sit and recall it all of a sudden. That won't happen. We go to the next page. And I give you a little hint there, and I think we go to the discussion after that. A little further down, please, Kalle. Yeah, that's the one. The inner is tied up with the outer, and listen now, not only empirically, but also logically. The second is incredibly important. The whole sentence is, of course, the Klein bottle logic. But remember, logically, the inside is tied with the outside, not only empirically. And logical makes that rationality won't mean anything if we don't practice all sorts of things. We will have a developing loss of meanings, not overnight. It will take time, and we become more and more lost somewhere. We're no longer tied up to an understanding that makes any sense to us. And we won't know. And after doing that for some time, maybe having a connection to an institution where it's happened for centuries, since Newton or Descartes, if you like, you can state such a thing as private language argument. You can become an idealist like Bernardo Kastrup, or you can go into the other camp. You can become a Dawkinian or Daniel Dennett, denying consciousness, which makes no sense at all. What would it even mean that we don't have any consciousness or I or sensations? It doesn't mean anything. Kalle, please come in. Come and join.
Yes, these two phrases are great. In the beginning was the deed.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I thought you were going to like it.
An inner process stands in need of outward criteria. The inner is tied up with the outer, not only empirically, but also logically.
Yeah, exactly. It's very important that logic comes in there. It's not only empirical, it is logically.
Mm. Let me go here to this same phrase that you mentioned already. The philosopher fails to see that when a situation gets more and more abnormal, the meaning of our words will become more uncertain. We'll be totally lost in some specific circumstances. Let me take Descartes as an example. Cogito ergo sum, his famous phrase.
Yeah.
So in a normal life, you don't say, I think, therefore I am.
No, you wouldn't,
Uh,
would you? Sorry.
no, because in everyday life, I am is actually connected with context.
Mm,
Let's say I am sad, happy, and so forth.
mm.
And think, therefore I am. So there is some kind of passiveness also. Think, am.
Yeah, definitely. It's in there.
Um, so this is no, no. When you lose the context, everything becomes strange.
Mm.
To say, um, hmm. So I don't know what Wittgenstein would perhaps say. I think, therefore I do, or therefore I act, or something like that. Even though it would be not have much sense that either.
No, no, exactly. But he has to say something because he's writing books. If you get my drift.
So in Wittgenstein, everything is, or is everything should be always contextual. Otherwise, they are meaningless.
Yeah, 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 exactly. It's, in a way, Kalle, if there is, it's pretty close to the Alexander technique.
Mm,
You do not lose your balance, your good posture that you had as a child overnight.
mm,
It happens slowly,
mm,
and in the end, you're going to be so lost so you don't know even how bad it feels to stand with a slouch
mm,
or not sitting on your sitting bones, or as I usually do, overstretch my back, and so
mm,
on and so on. It is very close. It's a process of decadence almost, or uh, a digression.
mm. What does Wittgenstein mean with this small distinction? Can you give a concrete example? We will perhaps get
Yeah,
to
yeah.
it
It's like
later.
let me give different examples here. It's like the position of putting one knee over another one while sitting. Uh, in some circumstances, if you are balanced and you want to have a particular look, it is more than correct. It's apt. It's abnormal. It's not common. And even Frederick Matthias Alexander sat at some occasions like that. But to sit like that on a daily basis, or I'd say by hours, so it's the degree that makes it abnormal. And when it comes to the word truth, which Edward de Bono, which I by by incident met upon, sometimes we in daily language we use the word truth in a maybe strange sense, maybe like an idiom. Uh, I can ask almost rhetorically, what is the truth, Kalle, about everything? And then somebody named Anders, he comes into and he says, I'm going to pick, because truth doesn't seem to have any use really here. It's not connected to anything. it won't give any response from anyone. The way I use truth here, it's a rather weak expression.
Mm.
But Anders, he says, oh, it doesn't have any meaning there. He doesn't think that, but and then he used truth all the time. And all of a sudden, you get a rationality that is based on the assumption that you can have a private truth. That would imply that you can be dishonest and still have a sense of truth. You can lie in every situation when it suits you, and you can still know truth. That is most probably not the case. So that is sum and all. So the sum is made to an all.
Mm. Yes, to refer to Canfield's paper about Wittgenstein, Canfield affirms that for Wittgenstein there's really no thinking, um, and somebody wrote the paper, The Empty Mind of Professor Canfield.
Okay.
You remember that? But in one way it catches what Wittgenstein wanted to say. Speaking of thinking is meaningless. It's interacting that everything happens.
Yeah.
So Wittgenstein could have said perhaps, I think, therefore I am. No, I act, therefore I am, but it would still.
He could say that in his books. Yeah, very good, Kalle. Yeah, yeah.
Or Canfield's Wittgenstein would have said, I act, but I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think Canfield was good. Maybe he took it a bit too long, too far, but
Or my interpretation of
mm,
Canfield is that
mm,
we have to differentiate between ideal situations and everyday
mm.
situations.
Yeah,
In everyday
yeah,
people, they think and they act.
yeah.
But the ideal person, like the Buddhist who has
Mm.
obtained nirvana, he does not think.
No, maybe not. Yeah.
He acts only. And also the ideal philosopher in Wittgenstein only acts.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's a working solution for
And
now.
using that as a criteria, Descartes is very, 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 very far away from the ideal philosopher.
Yeah, yeah.
Because he only thinks and he's sloppy. He only says "I am" passively. So it's meaningless. It's a very slow, very low, very what do you call it? He has not even reached the average person.
No, 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 most definitely. And how can we know anything about Descartes? Well, we have to look at the criterions. It's very hard now to tell. We don't know about Descartes. It's like 3 centuries away, almost four. But there are some hints. No, I'm just playing now, Kalle and listener. I'm just playing with the whole thing. But let's say, why did he go to Stockholm passively to visit Queen Christina? He was a bit passive. A person who wasn't really engaged in his own life. That sort of person tells us how much does his words mean. We must bring in the figure. Of course, we can't know anything about Descartes. We're very, very separated from him. But this is just an example. People who wrote about him said he was slouched. He was not very into the things that happen around him. So those are the criterions. The more you engage in your life, the more you take care of everything in your life. Your dress, your what you eat, tie your tie, give your shoes a shine. Yeah, here we can hear. I just read very, very quickly that he has to go up at 5 o'clock 3 times a day, a week, in the bitter coldness of Stockholm in the winter. Of course, that killed him off. So look at the criterions and you can get a hint. Now it's too late for Descartes, of course, but that's the life world.
Perhaps we should end there with this beautiful painting.
Wow, yeah, I really like that one. That's a nice one. Her good old Christina, before she went off to Rome and converted to Roman Catholicism. An unusual thing for a reigning queen to do, or reigning king for that matter. I wonder if it happened somewhere else. Thank you very much, Kalle Lundahl, for your comments, and thank you everyone for your patience with this very difficult passage. Do not be discouraged. It's one of the hardest one I ever seen, but it is very, very helpful. If you take on the task of paragraph 142, you go further than most interpreters of Wittgenstein ever did. Thank you very much. Have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon, or night, wherever you are. Bye bye for now.